In the mid to late 19th century, hundreds of thousands of Irish Catholics poured into Scotland, which was at that time an almost entirely Protestant country. The wave of Irish immigrants hit Glasgow first and spread eastwards through the Central Belt, mainland Britain's narrowest strip of land where most of the Scottish population live. Initially fleeing famine and poverty in Ireland, Irish Catholics took up permanent residence, causing alarm and anxiety to the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland, who in 1923 petitioned the UK government with this report titled "The Menace of the Irish Race to Our Scottish Nationality." Reading the report and reflecting on the history of Irish immigration into Scotland, I was struck by the parallels with immigration in Britain today. There are so many lines stemming for this subject, it would be simplest to just read through the report and try at least to paint a broad brush picture of post-immigration conflict in Scotland past and England present. I will be using imagery from Rangers and Celtic football clubs, as they are widely recognisable spectacles of conflict between Irish Catholic and Scottish Protestant identities. The binary nature of football matches the binary nature of sectarianism, two competing entities locked in a dramatic power struggle. The problem of the Irish Roman Catholic population in Scotland. They cannot be assimilated and absorbed into the Scottish race. They remain a people by themselves, segregated by reason of their race, their customs, their traditions, and above all, by their loyalty to their church. And gradually and inevitably dividing Scotland racially, socially, and ecclesiastically. This section summarises the main thrust of the report, identifying the menace as Irish Catholicism, which is dividing Scotland racially, socially and ecclesiastically. Then, as now, immigration divides the host nation's race, culture and religion. The Church claims that the immigrants cannot be assimilated. They remain a people by themselves. We could look at these displays of Irish nationalism in Scotland today through the lens of the Kirk Report as demonstrative of 100 years of Irish non-assimilation. Successive generations of the menace that cannot or will not unify with the host nation identity, meaning permanent conflict within the nation. Migratory conflict, commonly known as sectarianism, which taken literally describes the sectioning, the dividing of society that immigration brings. Sectarianism's modern parallel is racism. Both follow after immigration and become major talking points in the historical periods they occupy. In Scotland's case, sectarianism was a regional conflict between two historic enemies, whereas in England today the conflict is national and international between the British and a global assortment of hostile nations. By modern mainstream standards, the report's opening paragraph is a blistering example of racist, sectarian bigotry. One scholar describes it as a mixture of sectarianism, racism and ethnocentrism. Scholarship's response reveals academia's positioning on the left side of the left-right or liberal-conservative dialectic playing out across the West. After the Second World War especially, the Church of Scotland followed the secular world into radical liberalism, with subsequent church elders wringing their hands over the now scandalous 1923 report.
I have to say, I'm ashamed to say it, but the Church of Scotland was quite awful in some of its responses at that time. The General Assembly saying terrible things about the danger of diluting the good Protestant blood almost. It was almost ethnic.
That the Irish were categorised as a separate race is deemed offensive and even absurd to modern ears. Today's society, under the guidance of educated liberal elites, with a globalist racial dialectic, with Irish and British together as white oppressors of incoming blacks and browns from beyond Europe. Although there still endures a sense of ethnic distinction between Celtic Ireland and Germanic mainland Britain. Glasgow's dominant Irish football team, started by an Irish Catholic priest in 1888, is called Celtic or Celtic, Glasgow Celtic. And today these Celts or Celts describe their enemies in anti-Germanic rhetoric as Huns. Celtic Park is revered in religious rhetoric as a paradise, signifying the Eden-like perfection of the Irish Catholic homeland and their harrowing struggle against British oppression. Celtic Park, in the quasi-religious spirit of modern football, becomes a shrine to Irish Catholic identity. Across the sectarian divide on the Protestant side, the stadium is loathed as a symbol of foreign occupation.
So I wake up in the mornings, I look out my front window, and I've got a perfect view of Celtic Park. That's the first thing I see. It's a nice one. Celtic Park, to me, is a breeding ground for republicanism, Catholicism, Sinn Féin, IRA, and everything I oppose.
In an addendum to the report, Scots and English are viewed together as a British people, in opposition to the large and ever-growing non-British, that is Irish, population. But it identifies Irish Catholic immigrants specifically, the majority share of immigrants, but there was an estimated 1/4 Protestants, welcomed as returning sons from the Scottish colonies set up in Northern Ireland in the early 17th century. Ulster Scots are re-assimilated into the desired one religion, one race unity, energising Scottish ethno-religious identity with a distinctly orange flavour.
An Orange man, first and foremost, believes in the Reformed Protestant evangelical faith.
The addendum describes the Irish immigrants as a nation within a nation, conveying the internal nature of the menace. Early 20th century Scots contended with a single menace in Irish Catholicism, but in today's multicultural Britain, and England in particular, there are a plurality of powerful menaces striving to impose their identity within the host nation. In both past and present cases, dialectical conflict can be generalised as immigrant versus native, polarised ideologically as immigrationism versus nativism, in left and right-wing political movements. Liberal elites dominate the pro-immigration narrative. They want to liberate persecuted minority ethnicities from the native majority.
White.
Rousseau's liberal notion of the noble savage is useful in understanding liberal reverence for uncivilised society as more virtuous, more deserving than the oppressor Western civilisation. This is how liberals view Irish Catholics in early 20th century Scotland, or say Pakistani Muslims in the early 21st century England. We could in fact take the Kirk report and swap the term Irish Catholic for Pakistani Muslim, and it would sound like a BNP leaflet from the turn of the 21st century. The problem of the Pakistani Muslim population in England. They cannot be assimilated and absorbed into the English race. They remain a people by themselves, segregated by reason of their race, their customs, their traditions, and above all, by their loyalty to Islam, gradually and inevitably dividing England racially, socially, and religiously. The English today are going through their own identity crisis as a number of ethno-religious tribes dominated by Islam fail to assimilate. The report puts religion first in defining identity. Scotland is celebrated as the most Protestant of Protestant nations, being homogenous in faith, that is Protestant faith, and ideals. This paragraph is bookmarked with positive and negative historical cases. The triumph of the Reformed faith in Scotland, resulting in Roman Catholicism being practically extinguished. Catholic and Protestant identities are, within a Christian context, antithetical worldviews, both Christian, but diverging irreconcilably on a number of core beliefs. The status of Mary and the authority of the Pope being two major differences.
sun in my eye. No nuns and no priests, but your rosary beads every day.
Anti-popery endures in a secularised age, reflecting Scotland's historic Protestant identity. Seeing as we live in a secularised society, we should think about how deeply our forebears believed in God and the literal truth of the Bible. The Kirk, as the Church of Scotland was popularly known from the days when it was a key national institution, took its role as the nation's spiritual guardians very seriously, determined to rescue the nation from an apocalypse, featuring the papacy as Satan's earthly instrument, the dreaded whore of Babylon.
In the book of Revelation, it is written that Jesus Christ says, "Come out of that great whore, and those of you who remain in it will be damned." I firmly believe that when Jesus Christ speaks that, he's speaking about the Roman Catholic Church.
We could compare our 1920s Kirk to their fundamentalist Christian cousins in America. But what made Scotland the most Protestant was its constitution, its national covenant. This refers to the three documents signed in the 16th and 17th century by monarchs, churchmen, nobles and commoners. The national covenant is a spiritual contract between Scotland and God, echoing biblical covenants between God and Israel. It swore present and succeeding generations in this land to the Protestant faith, and swore to abhor and detest all contrary religion and doctrine, but chiefly all kind of papistry. Historians note Scotland's uniqueness in having signed an actual physical document, rather than aspiring to abstract Christian principles alone, embedding Protestantism deep in the Scottish psyche. Mainstream commenters today call this Christian nationalism. It has become quite a talking point following Trump's presidential embrace of his evangelical following.
Carrying Bibles, flags that read, "Jesus is my savior, Trump is my president." Some people literally carried crosses to the Capitol and led prayer groups on that day.
The near hysterical response of mass media, academia and governments who denounced evangelicals as Christo-fascists exposed to many ordinary people how radically liberal our institutions have become. Yet Trump-era Christian nationalism is quite liberal in comparison to its Scottish predecessors in the Kirk, who took an unapologetic anti-immigration, anti-Catholic stance on the grounds of being a one race, one religion, divinely covenanted nation, a Western pinnacle of Christian nationalism. At this point, I'd like to clear up any notion that this 1920s Scottish nationalism is in any way like today's Scottish Nationalist Party, which is not nationalist at all, but by the SNP's own admission as an internationalist organisation in favour of open borders, multiculturalism.
The Scottish independence movement is an internationalist project.
True to the clown world spirit of today, the Scottish nationalists are anti-nationalists. A political oxymoron perhaps designed to deconstruct nationalism from within, fuelled by the liberal will to liberate the oppressed global masses from British imperialism.
White.
The SNP have stripped Scottish identity of its usual ethno-religious markers and reconstructed it as a globalised civic identity that anyone from anywhere in the world can claim.
Give me a shout right now if you are a new Scot.
In the liberal equalisation process, native people are pushed out to the margins to make way for minorities in the centre. The same centering of the margins that happened in 20th century Scotland is happening in 21st century Britain, with liberal elites steering this radical demographic change. Radical liberalism is so embedded in Scotland that they have an anti-nationalist nationalist party fronted by women and foreigners who get so wrapped up in the madness of gender identity that they now struggle to tell the difference between a man and a woman. In their desire for radical equality, the SNP have armed globalist foreigners ideologically and put them centre stage to open fire on the native population.
White, 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 white.
Anyway, that was just to say the Kirk's 1923 nationalism is nothing like SNP globalism. So let's get back to the Christian nationalism of the Kirk back in the day. Irish Catholics were basically outside of the covenant, as this article puts it. In contrast, the British Institute of Monarchy remains inside the covenant because of its Protestantism. The monarch is covenanted under God's rule, unifying the nation from top to bottom under this most transcendent and foundational Western deity, the Christian God. Celebrated and sung today by Glasgow Rangers fans on the native side of the city, Britain's national anthem is deeply covenantal, putting God's name first as Lord and Saviour of the nation. Over on the immigrant side of the city, there is extreme hatred for the British monarchy. Demonstrated in the wake of the Queen's death when British football grounds observed the customary minute's silence. Celtic fans demonstrating nearly 200 years of non-assimilation were determined to ruin the national observance. This attack on tradition exposes the weakness of native submission to foreign aggression. Football authorities could not force the Celtic fans to be silent, so they tried to cover over the desecrated silence through an embarrassing clap your hands for the Queen event. An opportunity the Irish leapt upon to broadcast radical hatred of British tradition to the host nation and the rest of the world. An impressive piece of trolling really, uniting everyone clapping under the anti-monarchy banner. Even those booing the Irish could be booing the Queen, given the message of the song and the banner. The confused and embittered atmosphere that the immigrant revolutionaries inflict in the stadium is a picture in miniature of the intense hatred and confusion that draws everyone into its orbit. Centuries-old ethno-religious tensions come to a head when opposing identities are brought together in the Celtic Rangers fixture, which has over the years entertained with televised sectarianism, including football theatrics on the field, screaming matches on the touchline, and riots in the stands.
But now it is cascaded into violence. Here comes another charge by the Rangers fans. Wow, Celtic fans this time are charging. Bottles, cans and missiles being thrown, and it's a pitched battle out there. Is this football? Is it sport? It certainly looks like outright war here.
The Kirk report gives an insight into the deep religious identities beneath these relatively superficial football club rivalries. It says that Scotland is, at least before the Irish came, homogenous in faith and ideals, and goes on to champion the unity and homogeneity of the Scottish people. Again, this emphasis on unity and the threat posed to it by the divisive Irish menace. It was not until large numbers of Irish Roman Catholics came over from Ireland that the Roman Catholic Church began to grow, to feel her power, the beginning of the destruction of the unity. Roman Catholicism is personified as a she who feels her power grow, like the insatiable whore of Babylon, seeking to devour God's people.
In the book of Revelation, it is written that Jesus Christ says, "Come out of that great whore, and those of you who remain in it will be damned." I firmly believe that when Jesus Christ speaks that, he's speaking about the Roman Catholic Church.
England should pay heed to this message with the rise of Islam. Because this Protestant conservative fear of Catholicisation has its modern parallel in modern conservative fear of Islamification. And although today's British society is more secular than 100 years ago, the menace remains a religious one.
When the Christian activist group Britain First took large crosses through the English town of Luton last year, angry Muslims confronted them.
It's your country, is it? Yeah?
Your country. What, the Chris? He's a
Christian country. It's a Christian country. Yes, it is. This is a Christian country.
You're jealous that we're taking over?
Muslims will take over what?
Islam is the new religious power, growing in power, destroying the unity and homogeneity of the nation. But we will get more into the religious aspect later. For now, the report takes a detour into more secular concerns, and here we could benefit from some historical context. The 1840s famine and industrialisation were two key drivers of Irish immigration in the 19th century. This accelerated urban squalor and overcrowding, especially in Glasgow, the second city of the British Empire. 1920s Scotland was also recovering from World War I, socialism was on the rise, and an Irish Free State was formed in 1922. These are some of the historical factors exacerbating ethno-religious tensions in Scotland. The report makes the same sort of economic arguments we hear from the right today, the driving down of wages and living conditions, factors that hit the poorest natives first. Those that least need or want immigration get it the most.
Why can't they be dispersed to other areas, especially to the areas of these MPs and the people that welcome them to this country?
As a result of Ireland's underdevelopment in comparison to Britain, plus the famine of the 1840s, Irish immigrants were desperately impoverished.
This is an extract from an article in the Glasgow Herald, published 22nd of March 1847. The enormous number of Irish vagrants poured in upon us by steamer that arrives in the Clyde threatens to eat us up. The Glasgow Courier in June 1847 stated, without the slightest exaggeration, that this city is now in as bad a condition as respects Irish pauperism and disease as any city or town in the most afflicted districts of Ireland itself.
American nationalists thought they had it bad with their Irish influx, but Scotland was flooded with the huddled masses that were too poor to cross the Atlantic.
It's a disaster!
The report also denounces Scottish profiteers who advertised for cheap labour in Ireland, bringing Tony Blair's government to mind, said to have advertised in Pakistan and India for people to come to Britain for guaranteed work, benefits and citizenship. Meanwhile, a great exodus of the Scottish race. A great exodus of the Scottish race reminds us of today's white flight phenomenon. London being a common example of natives fleeing their homes in the face of mass immigration.
Have we got one? Our only hope is to be able to get away from Southall, away from it all. Like everybody else, all our friends have gone. There's nothing left for English people in this town anymore. I would like to say this. My wife and I used to like to go out weekends down to the local, have a couple of drinks, meet friends in there. We can't go into the locals anymore. They're full up with noisy foreigners, and we don't like it.
We
haven't got a place left where we, the English people, can go and enjoy ourselves in this town.
After going through 2 world wars, we should at least have the dignity of being allowed to live with our own kind.
This footage is for the 1970s. Maybe comparable with the 1870s in Glasgow. The report states that natives fled to find better conditions of life.
Urban areas are becoming increasingly Islamic, whereas rural areas are becoming increasingly English, and there's a retreat away from these two populations from each other. That's the future that is already happening, that the media isn't interested in.
In the Scottish case, many went to America, counted as a blessing to that land, but a grievous loss to the land of their fathers. Their places, we read, were taken by a people of a different race and a different faith, and Scotland has been divided into 2 camps, a Scottish and an Irish.
It's a disaster!
It's remarkable to read this 100-year-old statement and look at these modern spectacles of binary conflict by the opposing tribes of the 2 camps. In modern England, the immigrants inhabit a jumble of competing camps, fighting one another as well as the English. In the 2020s English Midlands, Indians fight Pakistanis over a cricket match, according to the news. But as with Rangers and Celtic, the sports event is not so much the cause as it is the symptom of existing historic ethno-religious division. Mass immigration, particularly where it involves oppositional nationalities and religions, brings chaos into once peaceful neighbourhoods, resulting in the white flight exodus. There is no parallel to these movements in modern or in ancient times. It is a thing unprecedented that one race should gradually, by peaceful penetration, supplant another in their native land. No parallel, the Kirk said in 1923, but English globalist leaders today are making a fair go of it. We see the same pattern of foreigners dominating cities and towns, not by military force, but by the peaceful penetration of sustained immigration.
The white British population has decreased by 600,000, while the minority population has increased by 1.2 million. So, yes lads, we're winning.
Engendering the same anxiety amongst English natives over their demographic replacement.
The history of this country for the past 1,000 years has been one of repelling or preventing invasions of one sort and another. And yet here we have a situation where an unarmed invasion is taking place before our very eyes. And it's not outside the bounds of possibility that future generations will look back on the British of today like we look back on the ancient Egyptians.
Today's right-wing commentary calls this the Great Replacement, positing that the white race in Europe is being deliberately replaced with non-Europeans.
This is not Karachi, it's London. Britain's policy of mass immigration has brought what one expert is calling demographic upheaval to the United Kingdom.
It's now a demographic certainty. Someday, the white native English will be a minority in their own country. It's just a matter of when.
Yes lads, we're winning.
Deliberately replaced by the liberal globalist elites. The claim that there is some sort of liberal globalist anti-British regime dominating Western society is made plausible by academia's openly anti-white, anti-Western bias. It is a notable fact that whenever the Irish population reach a certain proportion in any community, whether village, small town or area of a great city, the tendency of the Scottish population is to leave as quickly as they possibly can. It was interesting that the report does not go into more familiar socio-cultural reasons why natives leave so quickly. Having grown up in one of these Scottish towns that went from staunchly Protestant to part Irish Catholic, the stories from an older generation were of an Irish subculture of violence, drunkenness, vandalism and generally anti-social behaviour. I assume the Kirk were familiar with this, as the General Assembly did speak of this elsewhere, and they do go into judicial statistics in the report's addendum, which show Irish overrepresentation for crime convictions. The report was written for the London-based UK government, and perhaps the Kirk understood the Londoners would be familiar with the socio-cultural issues around Irish immigration. Here's a clip from a London paper highlighting the violent takeover of the Irish, labelled the terror of the neighbourhood. We've all seen these signs that read "No Irish, no blacks." At school I was taught this shows the racism of British people towards immigrants. Although this liberal assumption can be turned the other way if we ask, why did the natives feel the need to ban these specific ethnic groups? But since then the Irish have largely assimilated into English life, least so where they are most concentrated. But assimilation is more problematic with the new wave identities, which are much further removed from Britain.
The change in the number of people, and particularly the change in the origins of the people, in their religion, in their cultural background and everything, would make Britain unrecognisable compared with the present time.
Knife violence in London has soared in the wake of immigration, to the point where its foreign heritage mayor has become a meme for his excuses for the carnage in the capital. Glasgow began its rise to knife crime capital years before.
Knife crimes and razor gangs have been a presence on the streets of Glasgow for nearly 200 years.
Crime in Glasgow has decreased in intensity as far as I understand, prompting a lot of talk in news media about applying the Glasgow model to London knife crime. But they never mentioned that it was mass immigration into both cities that preceded the rise in violent crime. To even point out the connection is to be targeted as sectarian or racist. There are certain truths and patterns that are deemed too illiberal to notice, causing the right wing to believe there is a war on noticing. As in, oh look, immigration went up, then violent crime went through the roof. I mean, could there be a connection, you think? Glasgow knife violence was commonly a razor blade slash to the face, which boosted the slasher's status amongst his peers.
Knife crime is pervasive in Glasgow.
What?
You're lucky to be alive. Every 6 hours, someone reports a serious slash to the face.
There are more scarred faces in Glasgow than anywhere else in Britain.
But in modern London, it's cleavers, machetes and beheadings on the streets. The relative peace of homogeneity has given way to the chaos that radical difference brings to the nation. The right-wing maxim is import the third world and get third world problems. It was the same in Scotland. Import the Irish, get Irish problems.
These are scenes you might expect to see on the streets of Belfast or Londonderry. But this is Glasgow, 2005.
Growing up in the 80s, it was not a war zone or anything like that, but there was always an awareness of binary conflict saturating the social environment. As children, we went to either a Catholic or a Protestant school. On the way, you'd read graffiti on walls, F the Queen, F the Pope, and so on. You supported either Rangers or Celtic. You wore either blue or green, depending on what foot you kick with, as they say, or what foot you kick with, for our more anglicised viewers. Wearing the wrong colour in the wrong area could get you a kicking, if you're lucky, and a stabbing, if you're not.
You're going to cause yourself trouble, mate.
In local communities, everyone knew what side everyone else was on.
Less people in the community know
what's going on. What's going on.
Aye.
Your school, your name, your street, all were tells.
When you get it in building sites, you get it in pubs, certain pubs you can't go into, certain areas you can't go into.
Migrants have created areas of Birmingham known as no-go zones, places where non-Muslims are not welcome.
Certain towns you can't go into, certain villages you can't go into.
If they didn't know, they'd ask the dreaded question, what are ye? With only two possible answers, Catholic or Protestant. I would say a general post-immigration depression hangs over Scotland.
It's a load of shite.
And I used to ponder how a historically courageous, hard-working, sober-minded, outward-looking people could turn into a hopeless drunk sliding down a wall giving it, "I'm gonna stab you, you guy." And I wonder how much did immigration play its part? I know it's not like Beirut or Bosnia, but why should any child from any side have to grow up in a divided, hateful society?
I hate Rangers. Celtics Rangers are the best. Rangers are the crappiest.
In Lanarkshire alone, our biggest county, nearly a third were Irish. Lanarkshire is Scotland's most populous county. A busy network of towns and villages in the mineral-rich plains east of Glasgow that swelled with activity due to industrialisation. In the decades preceding the 1923 report, Lanarkshire had doubled its population to almost 1.5 million and went from practically zero Catholics to hundreds of thousands. Incoming immigrants fragmented Lanarkshire into a chaotic patchwork of Protestant and Catholic areas. Its sectarian bitterness lingers to this day.
And what tended to happen, particularly in Lanarkshire, which is really a series of smallish communities, is that they sent them to live in one place, the Catholics and the Protestants another. And all over Lanarkshire you find this extraordinary mirror image of two fairly small villages, small towns today, and the predominant population, overwhelmingly, I mean like to 80%, will be of one faith tradition or the other. Now, that kind of separation of people really doesn't really make for good social intercourse, to say the least.
It's a catastrophe.
Across the county, Scots were becoming minorities in their hometowns, and some villages, such as Croy, were exclusively Irish. The report predicts that if no action is taken, the Irish will continue eastwards to Edinburgh and Fife, effectively conquering the breadth of the country.
Yes, lads, we're winning.
This parallels with modern English counties in the north of England, fragmenting under mass immigration from many nations. Swap Lanarkshire for Yorkshire and Croy for Savile, and we see the same patterns of ethno-religious replacement.
Now, that kind of separation of people really doesn't really make for good social intercourse, to say the least.
Islam in 2020's England is the modern equivalent of Catholicism in 1920s Scotland, feeling their religious power grow, as the report would put it. And it is religion rather than secular cultural clashes that matter most to the 1920s Kirk. In terms of initial conflict caused by religious invasion, Catholicism in Scotland was far more contentious than Islam in England today, due to the Scots' covenanted Protestant identity and consequent hatred of Catholicism. It was a shock to the Scottish population, after centuries of Protestantism, to be confronted by the despised icons and rituals of Catholicism. Staying in Lanarkshire, we get an idea of the advance of Catholicisation. In the early 1920s in Carfin, 13 miles east of Glasgow, Irish immigrants built an open-air shrine to the Virgin Mary, in emulation of the famous Lourdes grotto in France, carving out a cave for Mary's statue and installing a spring for holy water. As the site grew in popularity, a train station was added, the annual stream of pilgrims reaching 200,000 by the 1930s. From all over the world they came, and stories of miraculous healings were reported. Carfin's small Marian shrine expanded to a 50-acre site as more shrines and statues were added to a pantheon of saints. It is Mary, though, who takes centre stage as the Mother of God. The sign reads, "Behold thy mother." Mary worship in Scotland was led officially by a Marian cult called the Legion of Mary. Founded in Dublin in 1921, it now has 10 million members worldwide, with Scotland its first success outside of Ireland. Of all the idolatries of Rome that Scots Protestants abhorred, Catholic veneration of Mary was particularly despised as a satanic subversion of the faith. From these Catholic sites, progressively larger processions went through surrounding towns and villages, holding Catholic banners and statues aloft, performing open-air masses for thousands of followers, sparking fights with natives. In 1924, Scottish police blocked a 60,000-strong Catholic procession from going through Motherwell town centre, where thousands of Protestants had gathered in defiance. 10 years after the report in 1935, we see the feared eastward spread of Catholicism in Edinburgh, where an international Catholic convention ended in a riot among 10,000 local Protestants. But despite native resistance, Catholicism established a permanent network of chapels and shrines across the land. The priesthood was pivotal in cementing Catholicism into social structures. It was Irish priests, for instance, that started Celtic Football Club and Carfin Grotto. The report calls priests the spiritual guides of the Irish people, accusing them of encouraging the influx of Irish immigrants for the purpose of converting Scotland to Catholicism. Open-air masses drew thousands of Catholic worshippers in what was perceived by Protestants as a show of power. Here we see the Mass performed in Celtic Park. The 1923 Kirk could not believe the changes in Scotland through Catholicisation, saying such things were the stuff of fantasy just 50 years previously. If they could have seen 50 years into the future, they would have witnessed a Scottish Protestant's worst nightmare.
As the Pope drove through the crowds for nearly half an hour, they knew, and he reminded them, of how far Catholicism in Scotland has come from the dark days of poverty and hardship.
What was a dream a century ago has become the reality of today.
Progressive Catholicisation climaxed with the papal visit of 1982. Pope John Paul II visited Scotland's two main cities, Edinburgh, the nation's capital, and Glasgow, to all intents and purposes, its Irish Catholic capital. Glasgow gave the pontiff a special reception, with hundreds of thousands of euphoric Catholics cheering for 7 minutes straight before their Holy Father could speak.
He let the cheers and applause run on for no less than 7 minutes. Then, like the great teacher that he is, he seized his opportunity and explained the exact meaning of what had just happened.
It was a moment, several moments, when the Pope became silent.
The 1923 Kirk had enough anxiety over the menace of a Catholic priesthood. A papal visit was not even in their worst fever dreams. This Pope, this figurehead of the Catholic faith that Protestants considered to be an antichrist, descending from the sky into Scotland, the covenanted nation, to be hailed by a sea of Roman Catholics. The event was a globally televised declaration of Irish Catholic victory over Scottish Protestantism, hailed by the liberal mainstream as a victory for equality and social progress, showing the world that we are not the evil bigots our forefathers were.
Glasgow was built on sectarian values, the discrimination rampant and all-pervasive. Occupying pride of place in the old merchant's graveyard is the symbol of Protestant domination, John Knox, the man who dedicated his life to a revolution against what he regarded as the tyranny of Rome. When mixed with widespread immigration from Ireland, this uncompromising mission bequeathed a poisonous legacy Glasgow is still coming to terms with today.
It was educated liberal elites within the church and secular institutions that paved the way for Catholicisation. Protestantism in post-war Scotland was succumbing to secularism. The Scottish reverence for the Sabbath, for instance, was giving way to rising consumer societies interested in political meetings and concerts. The last significant revival of Protestantism came during Billy Graham's 1950s crusades. Here at Ibrox Park, home of Glasgow Rangers, a symbolic counter to Catholic masses at Celtic Park. You can even chart secularisation of the natives in their songs. Where once they followed Jesus, they now follow their football team. Secularising Protestants identify more with football, flags, monarchs and British achievement. The Church of Scotland went from leading society to following secular global trends, submitting to ordination of women in the 1960s, gays in the 2000s, refugees in the 2020s, now alongside the Church of England as Britain's NPC, non-player churches of the 21st century, acting as weather vanes for liberal regime dogma on the latest thing. Christianity as a whole liberalised, Catholicism too, with some striking historical images of Catholic liberalism, including John Paul II kissing the Koran. Then Pope Ratzinger taking in this homoerotic ritual. And he's conservative compared to the current Pope, Francis. If the 1923 churchmen could have foreseen another 50 years beyond the papal visit of 1982, they would see the rise of Islam in Britain, an ethno-religious giant completely different to anything that came before.
It's a disaster!
Islamification is the modern parallel to 20th century Catholicisation in Scotland. It follows the same pattern of conquest, but ethnic and religious differences are far more pronounced than with the Irish, who the Kirk Report described as an alien people. How much more alien would the Muslims be to them, coming in from a different hemisphere with a different God altogether? The pattern is the same in terms of mass immigration, followed by a progressive takeover and a symbiotic relationship with the liberal state. What is termed today as Islamo-leftism, a socio-religious alliance dedicated to dismantling the current order. Whether it's Islamo-leftism today or Catholo-leftism back then, its core mission, that is its logical endpoint, the point which its activists and extremists push the mainstream towards, is the destruction of the host nation. That is its religion, race and culture, as the 1920s Kirk identified. Islam and liberalism may seem like awkward bedfellows when we consider them in isolation, but not when we take the native identity into account. Islam and liberalism share this will to power, and both are anti-Christian. Liberalism in its secularity and Islam in its obedience to its God, Allah. Like Catholicism in 20th century Scotland, its procession through the 21st century waxes stronger year on year.
This is Birmingham in the 1960s, a quaint little city in central England full of farmland, churches, and a bustling city centre that enjoyed a very low crime rate and picturesque historic streets. Flash forward a few decades. These images aren't from Iran, Iraq, or Afghanistan. No, this is modern-day Birmingham.
Islamic identity is particularly powerful. The Kirk would appreciate how unified it is. One people under God, with one prophet as his messenger. The identity is a powerfully united worldview that challenges a native identity already broken down by liberalism. Late 20th century liberalism insisted we don't have a culture. They would continually ask what it means to be British. They were effectively imploding our identity, like proper left-wing Hegelians folding it into itself, making us ask ourselves if we even have an identity, until the nation, that is the collected people of that nation, end up in some sort of identity crisis.
Who am I? Who am I?
Islam is way too self-assured, too confident in its own identity to abandon the faith of its fathers. No, Islam is not backwards and coming forwards at all. It is a militaristic movement that pulls no punches in demanding that the host nation submits to its will.
He is a deeply religious man who tonight dedicates his effort to all Muslims and every believer around the world. And at this time, to honor his father and family heritage, he is requested to say a few words.
Allahu Akbar! Allah is the greatest! Allahu Akbar! Ashhadu anna la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam.
Having the advantage of 21st century technology, the nation's sports fans are subjected to full-throated proclamations of Islamic dominion.
Champion Prince Nassim Hamed이가 마이크 플레이를 하는데요.
Having abandoned the faith of our fathers, the sports fan finds himself alone in front of a flat-screen TV, eating curry from a polystyrene tub while reciting Islamic prayers.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I may translate, I bear witness there is only one God, Allah, and Muhammad is his final messenger. Peace and blessings be upon him. Ladies and gentlemen, from Sheffield, England.
Notice how in translating this Arabic screed into English, the media is reciting Islamic prayers to the nation. I reckon the Kirk elders from back in the day, with their belief that this nation's core identity is spiritual, covenanted to the Christian God, would have been horrified to see the nation praying to the God of Muhammad. Here we see school children taken as part of their curriculum to mosques, where they pray to this other God. It is strange though, it seems the human never escapes worship. And if, as a society, we abandoned the God of our fathers, we fill that hole with another God, be it a sports team, a celebrity, a cause, ourselves, or God help us, Allah. And the Kirk reckoned that Rome's ultimate target is England, and Scotland was a strategic part of that process.
Roman Catholicism quite literally states, "Give me England, and I have the world."
Here, Islam is again parallel to Catholicism and liberalism in being a global power intent on absorbing England into its global identity, rather than assimilating into the host English identity.
English.
Islam and Catholicism are viewed by nationalists as foreign identities, serving foreign lands, Rome and Mecca. Along with secular liberalism, they will always be resisted wherever native Protestant identity endures. Like Catholic outdoor services in Scotland, Muslims hold massive open-air spectacles. Here we see over 100,000 Muslims praying outdoors in Birmingham, this epic show of spiritual power. Their network of mosques and imams, like the priesthoods and chapels of Rome, embedding their religion in the local communities. As church bells stop ringing across the land, the Islamic call to prayer goes out in Arabic over loudspeakers, radically transforming the sights and sounds of English towns across the land. One God, one prophet, no division tolerated. One complete Sharia-oriented worldview. Everything outside of this is haram, including Christian and British, especially English tradition.
English.
You can see how this is so appealing to the left, to the liberal, secular, progressive. If we take the rise of the Irish Catholic menace in the 20th century as a warning and think about its climax in the papal visit, what does the climax of the Islamic menace look like? Already the religion is everywhere. Halal foods are becoming normalised. Sharia courts are in operation. There are multi-faith prayer rooms set up in libraries and airports and the like. I've been in a couple and they are blatantly Islamic prayer rooms. All sorts of laws and customs are altered to accommodate the colonisers' religion, backed up by liberal elites, proclaiming the end of inequality. And we've spoken of the hatred and violence Irish Catholicism caused in Scotland. But this pales in comparison to the violence caused by incoming Muslim nationalities.
London, which has also seen a surge in immigration from Africa and the Middle East, just reported a 20% spike in cases of rape. Acid attacks, once unheard of in England but common in India and the Middle East, are also on the rise, along with a 30% increase in murders.
Our message to all of the shops here, all of the businesses, is to fear Allah.
It may be because Islam's founding figure, Muhammad, was steeped in lust, violence and conquest, while Christianity's founder, Jesus, was based in peace, forgiveness and self-sacrifice. So while historically Christians have committed acts of lust and violence. As the mainstream modern man would quickly point out, this behaviour contradicts Jesus' words and deeds. Whereas if Muslims commit the same heinous acts, they are vindicated by Muhammad's example, as the liberal state looks the other way.
Yet despite extensive evidence, Birmingham's government is turning a blind eye to the problem, instead calling the city a symbol of multiculturalism. Local leaders admit they're afraid of being called racist. Also on the rise are cases of children being sexually exploited by gangs of Muslim men. Police say they're baffled by the sharp increase despite a shocking 84% of child grooming and rape cases in the UK involving gangs of Muslim men.
And in the Sharia worldview, there is no act beyond the pale. Nothing is out of bounds, no matter how depraved, so long as it advances Islam. What we saw in our look at Christian religion in the West is a process of liberalisation. The Pope kissing the Quran represents a loss of Catholic identity. The churches of Scotland and England embracing liberalism and Catholicism along with all faiths and lifestyles is a compromise in their Protestant identity. Scottish identity was compromised in taking in Irish Catholics. Now English identity is compromised.
English.
If being Scottish is foundationally about being ethnically Scottish and Protestant, then that identity is abandoned. Then what is it you are?
Who am I, Who am I?
Similarly, England, which I would venture to say is foundationally ethnically English and Protestant, and they give that up. What are they? Into the vacuum floods the tribes of the earth, keen to impose their identity on this abandoned territory. I think the Kirk are right in identifying England as the target of liberal, globalist, anti-Christian forces. England is the core identity of the Anglosphere. It is the historic birthing ground of Britain and America. Therefore, it is perhaps the last obstacle in the mind of the global tyranny, the world system.
White British people will soon be outnumbered by Muslim migrants.
So, yes, lads, we're winning.
In part 2, we will deal with terrorism and party politics, where we'll see the same pattern then as now of the Labour Party growing in the back of immigration, while the Conservative Party fails to be, well, conservative. This exposes the national pipeline from immigration to radical liberalism. We will also see the noble savage principle compounded by the victim narrative and the revisionist demonisation of national history, painting our heroes as villains and our past as a problem to be fixed.
You get it in building sites, you get it in pubs. Certain pubs you can't go into, certain areas you can't go into, certain towns you can't go into, certain villages you can't go into.
And you're going to cause yourself trouble, mate.
It's a disaster! Disaster!
محمد رسول الله صلى الله.
Yes, lads, we're winning.
It's a disaster!